For his statement, and now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have taken note of the report of the permanent representative of Poland, Joanna Werneska, on the word of the Sanctions Committee 1591 concerning the Sudan. We note the overall positive trend in terms of the political military situation, the settlement of the conflict in Darfur. The security situation is stable. Armed violence is decreasing. Major clashes and intercommunity conflict has ceased. Refugees and IDPs are returning to their original places of residence. In our view, there is no alternative to the Doha document for peace in Darfur as a basis for a political settlement in the region. We welcome the measures being taken by Khartoum to implement that agreement. The signing on December 6, 2018 in Berlin of a pre-negotiation agreement for the resumption of the peace process demonstrate the parties' commitment to achieve lasting peace in the region through negotiations. In that context, we are discouraged by the unconstructive negotiating position of Abdul Wahid al-Noor. It is necessary to admit that attempts to court those who hold intransigent positions only harm the peace process. We believe that external sponsors of the Sudanese opposition must be more active in urging their protégés to make more realistic demands. Mr. President, as has been repeatedly said in this chamber, sanctions are not an end goal. Rather, they're just one instrument in the Council's toolkit in order to advance the peace process and encourage political dialogue. The positive developments we are seeing in Darfur show that the sanctions introduced 14 years ago have already served the purpose. It is evident that there is a need to develop a clear roadmap for the lifting of Security Council sanctions on the Sudan. In the context of the planned drawdown of the peacekeeping contingent of UNAMID, we would like to recall that a very logical and timely recommendation was made by the previous chair of Security Council Committee 1591, namely that steps to ease the sanctions regime must go hand in hand with the withdrawal of blue helmets. Eritrea's experience has shown that when there is political will on the part of the Western members of the Council, it is quite possible to make tangible progress in lifting sanctions. Unfortunately, however, we are not seeing such a political will so far. What's more, we're already hearing human rights activists signaling in favor of what would be a de facto strengthening of the sanctions regime on the Sudan by making sexual and gender-based violence into a separate listing criterion and expanding the capacity and the mandate of the experts of the 1591 committee and linking an eventual lifting of sanctions from the Sudan with resolving the problem of sexual violence in Darfur. In our view, such a transformation could upend the very essence of the Sudan sanctions regime, which was introduced in the interest of protecting international peace and security. Those who initiate such innovations are not doing this based on the real situation on the ground, but rather in line with their narrow national agenda, which is often far removed from the interests of a peace settlement in Darfur. Mr. President, a number of our colleagues today raised the topic of the protests in the Sudan. I would like to underscore in that regard that this topic is not related to the subject of our meeting, and the goal of this tactic is evident. It is to create the impression that the Council has the mandate to discuss, in the context of the sanctions regime, this purely national Sudanese issue. I'd like to underscore this has absolutely nothing to do with reality, and nobody should be misled on this matter. It's hard to get rid of the impression that raising this issue of anti-government protests in Khartoum, which is in itself an interference into internal affairs of the country, is part of geoengineering attempts by the West to replace regimes that it does not support. We have seen what this has led to in Libya, South Sudan, and other countries. We do not wish to make the Security Council of the United Nations and the 1591 Committee hostages to the geopolitical agenda of our colleagues in the West. To conclude, I would like to once again underscore that any Security Council sanctions regime must be regularly reviewed in light with the evolving situation on the ground. It is precisely with that in mind that we adopted Security Council Resolution 2400, which clearly states the need to regularly hold such a review. We hope that specific parameters for the lifting of sanctions will be developed soon. It is evident that the time for this has long come. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation.